Welcome to this introduction to simulation with Insight Maker. I understand that some of you are Insight Maker users and some are not. Insight Maker is a web-based facility for doing modeling and simulation. I did a session last week on developing qualitative models with Insight Maker, and in the information I distributed at the end of this session, you'll have access to the videos from last week. One was on Kumu and one was on Insight Maker. Insight Maker was developed by one phenomenal Scott Fort Monroe between 2009 and 2014. I was just the testing elf. I got to test everything that he built and make comments about what might have been different. And the nice thing about the environment is that it's sufficiently capable so that you can build meaningful simulation models. And if you want to share them with other people, all you have to do is send them the URL. And it's located at insightmaker.com. And if you don't have an account yet, if you just go to create a free account, put in your username, an email address, username that you pick, and some password, Insight Maker will send you a confirmation email, and then you can go ahead and log in. And once you log in, you will end up on your splash page, which will list any models that you have created in the past, and it will list them newest ones first in terms of changes you've made to it. So that this one I modified like 2 hours ago. Don't pay any attention to this row across the top. That's an admin set of capabilities that Scott gave me because he's got me looking after some things. In terms of currently, there are about 165,000 registered users for Insight Maker. And there are about that many models in the knowledge base. You can search in your own models. You can also look at new insights, which are things that people recently modified. And here, this one was modified 51 minutes ago. I mean, they're in reverse chronological order, so all the newest stuff is at the top. And you can also explore insights in terms of using the keywords, or you can search for text, and it's the text that shows up in the title or the tags or the descriptions that people write for their models if they write some. You know, so there's a lot of people who don't write much about their models. Once you're in, and there's a whole bunch of online help that is quite extensive that you can access. When you get ready to create a model, you just click Create New Insight, which there's a link to do that from almost every place. And instead of just giving you a blank page to deal with, which is, from my perspective, for a long time was the worst thing in the world because I wanted to get started. Here's a sort of a script on how to build and share your models. And this particular model right here is an actual simulation that will run in the browser. But when you're actually ready to start building something, just go ahead and click this and it will clear the screen. And then the first thing you should do is click Save. And I'm going to call this Sim Demo. And you can put any number of tags you want here, which is searchable, and whatever description you want about the model, and you can then save it as either public or private. Everything I've ever done has been public, and I just go ahead and save it. Once you do that, every change you make to your model will automatically be saved. You don't have to worry about it, just as long as you do the first one. And it then tells you that this is model number 168,274. And the last part of this is irrelevant. It's a convenience to the user. It brings up your model based upon this part of the URL. So this is the environment that you work in. There is no other place. Everything is here. There's a short video, short, it's probably 15 minutes long. It's creating your first simulation. There are a number of primitives that you use to create simulations with. There are flows and links, settings for simulation models, and to tell it to actually simulate. And here's a number of cosmetic things you can do, and I'll talk about some tools later. And this gets you back to your splash page. Simulation models are created with 4 kinds of things, essentially: stocks, variables, flows, and links. Stocks are, you can go here and select from the list, or you can just right-click and create it. The nice thing about doing that is it selects the text, and you can then just go ahead and click and change it. Now, for every entity that you create, on the right there's a parameter panel that are attributes of that particular entity that you can set. And I'm not going to talk about all of them right away, but I'll get to most of them. Most of them are relatively obvious once you think about what it is that you have just created and this is parameters for. Stocks are things that accumulate or decline over time based upon some inflow or outflow. And once you name it, you can also create a note, bunch of stuff. You can also click this down arrow and it will open a box where you can go ahead and actually create and format a description of that entity. Once you put text on it, when you mouse over an entity, there's a little eye and you can select it and a tooltip shows up. You can also do control period, which will open that box so you can edit it. I firmly recommend that people document their models well, especially if they're going to share them with other people, and even if you're just going to share it with yourself and put it away and not look at it for a period of time, because I find it amazing what I don't remember about my own models 6 months later when I go back and look at them. And I say, why did I do this? Okay, so stuff is stuff. It has an equation which defines what it is. Now, initially, it's identified as 0. And as I said, you can only change stocks based upon inflows or outflows. You can use a variable to assign the initial value of a stock, but it's the simulation process that actually alters the quantity of stuff. So let me go ahead and select flow and create a flow. And because of the nature of the environment, you end up having to create a flow that goes outward, but then you can change it so it's actually an inflow. And let me go ahead and, well, the flow is here. You know that over here is a place where you can define the equation, say it's only positive. You can also click on the little equal sign and say that the flow is 1. So I now have a stock that's nothing, 0, and a flow of 1. And let me go ahead and change the settings and say, I want this to start at 0 and run for 10 periods and have a time step of 1. So if I now stimulate this, I obviously get a graph that goes from 0 to 1 or 10 over 10 time periods. You can have multiple displays, and let me go ahead and configure this. I will call this direct, because I'm going to do 3 different simulation models as part of this demo. You can do time series, you can do scatter plots, you can create tables, and this is for agent-based modeling. You can control the legend, you can do labels on both sides of the axis, typical kinds of things. And here it says, add newly created primitives to the data, so that as you create new components to the simulation, it will automatically add them to the graph. But I'm going to turn that off. So let's see, axis, net legend position, automatic, and tell it to apply this. So I now have a legend, and it's direct. So I'm going to close this. You can also edit the title. Okay, simulation results 2. I said that Insight Maker has a lot of users. You will never know that any of them are there. Insight Maker was completely written in JavaScript, so it runs in your browser. So the only time it communicates to the server is to load your model and save changes. Everything else is resident in the browser. And everything is saved, which is why you can do this kind of stuff, to go back and look at where it was at different times. You also have an option here called Link Results to Model, which says that you can mouse over things and actually look at what the value of that was over the time period. And that's with this little thing here called Link Results to Model. Now, if I went ahead and changed this flow to 2 and run the simulation again, well, it goes to 20. All of the data for the first run is still in there. It's in other words, it's saving everything that you're looking at, so you know what you can look at the two of them, compare, and there's also a place to be able to compare models. Okay, so let me make this back to 1, which is where I wanted it. There are also all of these built-in functions that you can use if you want to make a more complex definition of what the flow is, and you can also base it on additional variables. So also, if I hold the Shift key and select all this, well, I think I only got part of it, shift all of this, I can put it in a folder. That's weird. Not quite sure why it did that, but sometimes. And I'll call this stuff of direct. Okay, so you can close the folder with this little thing over here, or you can open it. You can drag stuff out of the folder. You know that you've got everything out of the folder when you can no longer close it. If you delete the content of the folder, it will delete what's in it. Oh. Come on. All right, I'm not going to futz with it anymore. I'm obviously doing something wrong that I don't know that I'm doing wrong, but so more trial and learning goes on an ongoing basis. Cancel this. So just let me put this back in the folder. Why I have to go find out why it's doing that. So add the primitive, put it in a folder, close the folder. What I'm now going to do is I'm now going to take this folder and I'm going to duplicate it. You cannot copy and paste from one model to another, but you can get stuff from one model to another doing an import, and I'll show that at some point. I'm going to call this, now that I have a copy of this, I'm going to name the stuff something else, savings, and I'm going to call this interest. And the interest is actually dependent upon, what, I don't know what that is actually dependent upon the value of savings and the value of the interest rate. So I'm going to create a variable and call it interest rate, put it inside the folder, and draw a link from here to the flow and from the savings to that. Now, it's laying on top of each other, which is terribly annoying. So if I hold the shift key, it puts a waypoint on it so I can actually curve the line. And what I will now do is say that savings is 1, let's make it 100. The interest rate is 0.05. And the interest I will now define to be the savings times the interest rate. Apply that. Go to simulation. No, I don't want to do simulation. I want to set the settings to say that it's 0 to 10 in years, and it calculates the interest on a yearly basis, which is not realistic, but just for an example, you notice that, well, I add a display, call it savings, and I want to display the savings and tell it that I want, okay. So now I have another display, it's savings, and I start with $100, and in 10 years, I have $165. So that's the difference between direct and a situation where the flow is based upon the value of the stock in some manner and maybe some other variables, and it's essentially a reinforcing structure. Questions so far? Am I going too fast? Okay. So I've gone from direct, where it's simply a flow into a stock, and I won't say that it's linear, but it's the increase or decrease in the stock is directly dependent upon the flow and nothing else. Whereas here, there's actually a piece of feedback that's part of the situation, so that the flow is dependent upon savings and whatever the interest rate is, so that it produces exponential growth, and it's a reinforcing structure. Now, I will go ahead and duplicate this because I'm too lazy to do new ones, and I'll call this pool, and I'll call this full pool, and I will define the pool to be empty and the full pool to be 100, and I will define water flow to be full pool minus the amount that's in the pool. So that when I now I'm going to simulate this, but I need to create a new display and call it pool. And I want to display the full pool, the water flow, and the pool, and apply that. So I have, interestingly enough, why does it do that? Why does it fill the pool in one time period? Pool is 0. Full pool is 100. Oh, because, okay. So this is the dance that goes on with simulation models on an ongoing basis. You tell it what you think, and then it tells you how dumb you are. So you revise your thinking about what it is that you're telling it, and then it tells you again whether it makes sense or not. So that it's doing exactly what I told it to do. I said that the flow is the difference between the full pool and what's in the pool. And what's in the pool is 0 and the full pool is 100. So in one time period, it goes and it fills the pool. Now, so maybe if I go ahead and change the settings and say that I want to go ahead and take my time step to be a quarter of a year, it should be smaller, but that's okay. And I do a simulation again and look at pool, I have a very different view of what's happening because it's only taking chunks. It's stepping by a quarter of a year, and it's spreading the transition out as opposed to showing me 1 year all at once. So this is the typical pattern for a goal-seeking structure where this is the goal. It starts out at some value. As the water flows, the pool level begins to increase, and the flow is dependent upon the difference, so the water flow continues to decline as the level increases until it gets to the goal, and then it stops. You are now looking at all that there is associated with simulation models. No matter how complex the simulation model is, it's some combination of direct, balancing, and reinforcing and goal-seeking structures combined. It's all that, I mean, when I finally got to this realization, I was sort of, I don't know, it was a real tipping point in thought to realize that if I look at it piece by piece by piece, it's very understandable because there are only 3 parts to it. It's either a direct transition, it's a goal-seeking structure, an exponential growth or reinforcing structure, or a balancing goal-seeking structure. You may have dozens of them combined, but this is all there is. And if you haven't used Insight Maker, my suggestion is you go to Insight Maker and you create these 3 structures and you play with them, because it's understanding them that's responsible for anything that you want to build. And the other thing that I will offer you that took me years to learn, which I demonstrated to you without talking about it, is put a piece in it and test it, and put a piece in it and test it. Don't put a dozen pieces in the model and then spend 2 days trying to figure out why it's broken. Because, I mean, I did that to myself for years, and it was just stupid. If I got it, I mean, I remember when I used to do simulation models in GPSS on an IBM 360 with punch cards, okay? You had to punch the cards and submit them and wait for it to run and get the printout back to find out you left out a period or comma or something. And now in this type of environment, all you have to do to test your model is click simulate, and you can do it as many times as you want to or need to. So you build pieces and test them and add another piece to the model. So in terms of other things that are part of this, the stocks, you can tell it whether or not it can be negative. You can tell it that there are 2 types of stocks. There's a store and there's a conveyor. You can also have sliders associated with things. So like this one, if I take the interest rate and I tell it that there is a slider, and I tell it that the maximum value is 10 and the minimum value is 0, and it's 0.01, I now have a slider for this interest rate, so I can readily change the value of that to do the simulation run. So I could do this for, if I could simulate this, look at the savings account, I can change this and run it again. And if I link results to model so that I could then just close this a little bit, get rid of this. I can look and see what the values of these elements were. In addition, because I've linked the results to model. Oh, let me look at the right thing, savings. It's recalculating the simulation as I change the value. So I can see the impact that it has on the result. What else we got? You can put constraints on various things, whether there are and what the max and minimum values are. It will also do units, but units drive me nuts. I end up fighting with them endlessly, but they're really a good thing to understand because they help you ensure that you're not adding apples and oranges to get bananas. What else we have? I'm going to talk about storytelling next week in terms of how you can unfold a simulation. In other words, once I develop a simulation and want to share it with someone else, I can put comments on it. These all say the same thing because I duplicated them. But it's good to not try to get them to eat the whole elephant at once. Somewhere along those lines, I made a connection between a model and a play. I used to inflict my models on people all the time. And I'd send them to them, and they'd send me back a comment like, well, that's nice. What they really wanted to say was, why the hell did you send this to me? If you go to the theater and you watch a play, you watch the relationships between the actors unfold from one act to another, at the end of the play, if it was done well, you leave with the story in mind. Well, if you take a complex model and you unfold it for people piece by piece and tell them a story, it's easier to understand than if you just show them the whole picture and say, well, that's it. And Insight Maker has a very nice facility for unfolding this is this is a simple goal-seeking structure developed to point out the difficulty with delays in environments that make it very difficult to intuit the behavior of a structure. So this is the desired state, the current state, and it influences action to change the current state. If you represent this as a simulation and with a time delay involved, so if I simply step this forward, the story is set up so that it actually sets the values of the things and runs the simulation. It then changes the delay to 1. You notice it overshoots the goal and you have to exert effort to bring it back to where you wanted it to. If the delay is 2, it's a damped oscillation, which takes it longer. At 3, it never dampens out. It's continuously out of control. And if it's 4, it destroys itself. And the only thing I'm changing is the period of time that it's delaying. And what this is, if I exit the story, this is all done in a series of steps to make things visible, change values, and run the simulation. And next week, I'm going to do an introduction to the storytelling features within Insight Maker. Let's see. Sorry, that's not where I want to be. Get lost in my own stuff. Questions? Did I lose everybody? Hello?
So we're still here, Gene. I'm just, I think I'm going to have to rewatch this to get it all to sink in again.
Well, part of my difficulty is being so familiar with the environment. I may have gone too fast.
No. We all have an economy of time that we're trying to manage. So
okay. All right.
This is all good.
Okay. Let's see. So, as I said, why don't you show an example of joining a couple together? Okay. So, joining a couple together, if I go ahead and create a stock and call it customers market, and I'll create one called customers, and then I'll go ahead and do a flow from market to customers. I mean, you want to take people from the market and turn them into customers. And I'll say the market has got 100 people and there are no customers, and the flow is dependent upon the market All right, come on. Oh, duh. I created another flow. So I'll create this. Hold the shift key and click on it to put a waypoint on it so I can see it. And so what is the flow? It's the customers times 0.1. All right, so I'm moving 10%. I'm turning 10% of the customers market into customers on an ongoing basis. And so I will go ahead and look at the settings, and still I'm going to do it for 10 years. We'll see how it comes out. Let me run this. I actually need a new display. Call it customers. And what do I want? I want to display customers, market. And the flows are confusing because I haven't differentiated the titles of them. And that's not right. So if this is the customers, which is 0, and the market is 100, the flow is, oh, how about I make this market? Make this market times 0.1 as opposed to customers, since there were no customers. So over time, the size of the market is declining and the size of, or the number of customers is increasing. If I made this larger, .5, and simulate it again. Because it's taking 50% of the market and turning them into customers every time frame, so that the the market is rapidly getting smaller and the customers are increasing. And when the organization gets disturbed because sales are declining over time, it's not the sales force's fault. It's because they're consuming the market, and you need to go figure out how to expand the market if you want more customers. Is that the example you're looking for, or close to it, or usable?
Yeah, no, that was great, Gene. I think, I think this is really neat to see the sort of, like you said, the building blocks that you could then start to stitch together. And I think, I think, as you've said that before, I think needing to kind of get my hands dirty and play around with what you can sort of do with it. How do you can build some of these up to make more complex simulations and logic chains that build up. But I think the simple pieces are necessary to really understand to then how to deploy them and how they build on each other. So thank you for this.
So, okay, this is, well, let me show you the other version of this, which makes it slightly easier to understand. This is from a paper by Sturman and somebody at MIT about, given a situation where there's a performance gap, it influences the organization to work harder or to work smarter, and the implications of what happens as a result of doing them. And this is that same thing turned into a simulation model, whereby if you look at the initial steady state and then you increase the performance requirement by saying that it increases, the environment changes over time, and the cost of operation increases dramatically with the organization simply working harder as opposed to working smarter. Whereas if they actually spend time working smarter, the cost of operation goes up and then comes back down dramatically compared to what it was before. And the real question is, what kind of trade-off does the organization want to make between working harder and working smarter? And you can play with this model in terms of the difference between how much of their time they spend working harder and how much of the time they spend working smarter. But there are a whole bunch of pieces here, though. If you look at it, there's 3 balancing loops and a reinforcing loop. There's just a lot more pieces connected, so that these 2 variables define desired performance in some sequence or some formula, and then the performance gap is defined in terms of the desired minus the actual. And as I commented, you build it a piece at a time and you test it, because if you sit down and put this all together and it doesn't work, you have to go a long ways to figure out what to do about it. Now, there are some things that you can't easily define as a formula. There's an entity here called a converter, which allows you to specify the value of something over time. What are the values? And you can specify them based on time, or you can specify the output based upon some other input, so that if this was defined upon, let me take links, take customers to here, I could define this customers as the input, so that I could define what the output is based upon what the value of customers are. There are lots of things that we attempt to model, which we sort of have to to guess at what the real relationship is, because it doesn't come out to a nice formula like A plus B times C. So the converters allow us to take care of that. You can add text fields any place you want to for notes. You can add pictures if you want pictures. You can put labels on the pictures. And for the pictures, there are some bunch of included built-in images, or you can use a custom image of anything that you can find somewhere. Image bank. Copy image address. That was not a good one. There we go. The bad thing about this is using URLs for images on the internet. The internet's constantly changing. So there's a utility that I found called Cloudinary, which, using the free version of it, I've been using it for 5 years and haven't run out of space yet. So, and that way I use all of my own links to my own images, so I don't have to rely on things on the internet not changing. I have almost 5,000 images in here, and I'm only at 1% of my plan limit for free. So there's a lot of space in it. It's simply called cloudinary.com. More questions? Tools. It also allows you to identify loops, compare loops. It'll do sensitivity analysis and goal seeking and lots of things that I seldom find use for, but they're there. Did I include this? Hold on. Let's see. Events, simulation, scenarios. Oh yeah, this one. It also has this thing called a button. Let me get out of this. When Scott added this, I said, "What's that for?" Well, it's for this. If you want to do a demo for people and you don't want to remember what the values are that you want to set to do the demo, a button, you have to hold the shift key to select it, otherwise you're telling it to run, and then you go ahead and ask it, you define it. Because it was all written in JavaScript, and he developed an amazing API for it also. Where's this? This is a set of commands that are in the application programmer interface that one can use. Where was I? Both in button scripts and in storytelling, so that if you look at the story for this, you look at the run action, it toggles the top bar and sets the zoom to fit, and then it's just showing the values. But you can, in the story, you can actually change the values of things. You can make things part of the model or make them disappear. I mean, because of the way it was structured, the capabilities are just essentially pretty much unlimited. When I distribute the video, you'll get a link to this context right here so that you'll have access to all these things that I've showed you. And when Scott and I wrote Beyond Connecting the Dots, we put together essentially 3 videos or 3 models that are the 3 different kinds of things that I showed, and it walks through them saying, what is it about these that are the same? And it is, in fact, that they all represent a stock with some inflow and some outflow, and they change over time. And then the recommendation is that you actually sit here and change the values and run the simulation. Can the model animate? No, John, there is not a way within Insight Maker to actually animate an image itself as the simulation runs. And since Scott fell in love and got married and has 2 kids and works for somebody else, his time to work on this is not what it used to be. Get rid of some of these. I was having a problem with Chrome hanging when I had several Insight Maker models open at the same time. If I tried to separate the windows, it would hang. And I found out it was Grammarly. Veronica says, I find some similarities with VenSim. If there's any comparative in terms of features between both. From my perspective, having used VenSim and Stella or whatever the alternative name is for Stella, Insight Maker is pretty much on a par with them, though it's pretty tough for free to compete with $2,000 for a purchase price. And we are currently supporting all of the registered users for Insight Maker, and we get 1 or 2 questions a week. So either the professors that are teaching it are supporting it well, or it's more obvious than I thought it would be. Go back to, and from in this environment, you can go here and you can tell, if you create a private model, you can give someone else access to view it. If you create a private or a public model, you can allow someone else to view it and modify it, so you can allow multiple people to work on a model. You can delete it. You can create a new Insight, just go to, or as I said before, you can clone anything that you see. So that if I click on clone, it will say, do you want to clone this? And it will make another copy of it, but with a unique sequence number, and the person who cloned it can do whatever they want with it. So it's easy to go ahead and recycle stuff that you see. There's nothing that's hidden. And you can embed the model in a web page or a blog or whatever you want with an iframe source code. You can import it. There's a experimental XML XML import. You can, if I said you couldn't copy and paste from one model to another, but let me go over here and find something. If I say that I want to insert an Insight Maker model and do this, this is the URL for some other model. it will bring it in and put it in a folder. So that other model, I can get all of the pieces in here. What did I mess up? A lot. So I brought this model in from someplace else, and I can then go ahead and take pieces out of it, or I could take all of the pieces out of it and have them be part of this model. So like I said, you can't directly copy and paste. You can get the content of one model in another model. What else? You can get a complete list of all of the equations that are in the model. You can also export the Insight Maker file itself. If you're really paranoid about having your stuff in Insight Maker, you can export an Insight Maker source file, and when you go back in to use it next time, you can import the Insight Maker file itself, save it on your desktop. And when Scott told me that the Insight Maker was written in JavaScript and ran completely in your browser, I told him that I didn't quite believe him. I guess maybe I'm from Missouri, though what he said was go to here and the source is completely online and free. You can download the source, load it into your browser on your desktop, and run, hi Zach, and run Insight Maker completely in your browser and never talk to the server. The difficulty is you end up having to save the model on your desktop because you're not talking to the server. Did that take care of the question, Veronica? Probably more than you asked for. Right. Well, I guess that's all I got, I guess. I suggest that you should just go play with it. Go and start with the absolute simplest model that you can create with one stock and one flow, and play with it. And when you create the equation, do some different kinds of input. Do a sine wave or some trig function or something as input, just so that it's not trivial like the one I had, and then use. One other thing. I said the only way that you can change a stock is with a flow. You can go ahead and use a variable as an initial value to assign a to assign a value to a stock, so that at the time that the simulation starts, the value of this variable will be assigned to the stock. And it's really helpful if you make that a slider and say that it goes from 0 to 100 by 5, so that you, and then go ahead. I got so many things here. What is it? In it, I can change the value of the initial value of pool before I run the simulation just by changing the slider. Well, hope you found it informative, useful. I have also started a Systems Wiki Slack group to go ahead and carry on conversations for ongoing Q&A with regard to the individual sessions. This is Insight Maker simulation. There's nothing there because it just got started. If you want to join this group, just send me an email and send me an invitation, and I'll go ahead and send you one. And right in here, it says Insight Maker Simulation. Here's the context link to get you to the right place inside of Systems Wiki for Insight Maker Simulation. And here are the events from last week. Here's the one on Kumu relationship modeling. Here's the one on Insight Maker relationship modeling. So now as I do the rest of the sessions, and when you go here, you can also sign up for any of the rest of them in the future. I'm really looking forward to doing this experiment in terror in June called group modeling. A group of us are going to get together and figure out how to go about doing that. So if we can figure out how to go about doing that without just upsetting each other to no end and accomplishing nothing. Okay. Well, thank you much. Have a good week, and I'll send you a link to stuff as soon as the video processes, probably within an hour. So,
Thank you very much, Gene.
You're very welcome.